This is, people have asked me this question in other forums, what is this most like? And I don't think this is really much like the recession that we experienced in 2008. It's maybe a little bit more like 9/11, just in the suddenness.
Yeah.
But it's unlike anything we've ever faced. And you're right, Chris, the loss of life and the suddenness of this is really just devastating for many organizations. And I'm hearing about situations from these companies that I never would have imagined. They never would have imagined, right? They're having to deal with situations that, just weren't part of the playbook in the past. And so I think agility and creativity, doing what's right for the employee base, has all been demonstrated in the last few weeks. What I'm really liking from a lot of organizations, though, and I think we have learned from previous downturns, is there's a lot more care for the workforce right now than I think we've seen in the past. I've been very heartened to see various CEOs come out and say, we're not going to do layoffs, right? I'm guaranteeing no layoffs. Or paying hourly workers, part-time workers, contractors even, it's for some unforeseeable future, right, inside that organization. So I think we are taking care of employees better today than we have in past downturns. Yet, you still have unemployment is going to skyrocket, and layoffs and furloughs and reductions in force are happening. And it's going to be a tough time for the next few months for these organizations. And I think this will really test the mettle of those organizations. And I think your employer brand will really get defined by what you do during this time period.
I think you're spot on. This is going to be really tough. I was thinking about innovation, sort of you call them next practices. For example, in HR, one of the trends that's been around for a while is around wellness and well-being of employees, and that's something that's had a lot of research and sort of discussion. And I think that is, at least initially, some of that's kicking in, but it's really going to be put to the test as companies, as the sort of just how long this is going to take sort of emerges. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that. I do, like you, I'm super optimistic with at least how the response to this has started. I was thinking that, here in Seattle, where ironically we were sort of blessed to have maybe some of the earlier cases in the US and as such kind of responded quickly. Some of the first responders were the big corporations, right? So Microsoft, Starbucks, kind of really pivoted and sent people home even before the governor sort of put those measures in place. And that may have actually saved a lot of lives, ironically.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think our elected officials have done a fantastic job and continue to do so, both at a state level and city, local level. In responding to this crisis, but there's still a long ways to go, and I think they're going to continue to be tested going forward.
What have you seen, Kevin, that you kind of really like with how, particularly sort of CHROs and CLOs are kind of responding? Are you seeing innovation come out of this change?
Yeah, we certainly are. I'm seeing it on a variety of different levels. I'm just proud and impressed by various CHROs who I think are doing just yeoman's work inside their companies. I read a great article in The Economist last week that said in 2008, having a great CFO really could have meant the difference between whether your company stayed alive or went under. And with this crisis, it's really all around the CHRO. And if you have great human capital talent, that's really going to dictate how your company is going to do going forward. And we're seeing that innovation happen, Chris, I think, on a variety of levels. For many of the HR functions, many of them have had to wear different hats. They've had to be called in to do different duties. And I've heard of learning leaders being called in to, handle call center management or, other aspects of the business that had to be kept going. And I think that's remarkable. And I think it's a testament to how our industry really can respond and do what's right for the organization. But from a learning perspective, obviously we're wrestling with a remote workforce. You've got a lot of managers who are doing, they're doing the virtual team thing for the first time.
Yeah.
It's not normal work from home either. A lot of these people have now suddenly, kids at home, young kids that, should be in school or even daycare. And in some cases, elder care is canceled, right? So they're dealing with, having to care for their parents at the same time. There's a lot of personal pressures, I think. We're going to have more going forward as the death toll rises from this crisis. And so working from home has so many different connotations right now than it normally does. Yet, I think when we do get through this, you've had a lot of executives work from home for an extended period of time for the first time in their lives, right? They've never had to do this. And so I think there's going to be newfound appreciation and understanding of what it's like to be remote. I think that's probably going to change a lot of organizations' perceptions of how to handle that. And I think for the learning community in particular, it's maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's an opportunity where suddenly people recognize the power of distance learning, online learning. Even though, you and I have been at this for decades, I think a lot of people are suddenly discovering it for the first time, or they're watching their kids utilize it. And schools suddenly have to pivot very quickly to delivering learning online. Some are doing it better than others, but I think at the organizational level, we've seen a lot of organizations kind of rediscover their LMS and even in some cases rediscover their LXP. We have this learning experience platform that we didn't really utilize, and now is the time to utilize it. So it's a very interesting time period, and one I'm hoping that we're taking advantage of and can learn from long term.
Yeah, the optimist in me just hopes that there's going to be a ton of innovation around this. I know my wife runs a small school, and they had all the infrastructure in place, but there was really not a lot of appetite from teachers and parents and, engage with online learning. It's very much it's a language school. It's very much about community. And boy, within 1 week, the entire operations moved online, and any resistance to that innovation sort of disappeared. And so I think, and I don't know whether you agree, but I think that we're going to see an incredible wave of innovation built on the sort of platforms and the experimentations that sort of leading companies did before. And I hope it's all going to go to hopefully a whole new level, and because the numbers of people shifting to teaching and learning online is staggering.
Right. And I think we're already seeing innovation. I think people are discovering aspects of some of these tools and how they can leverage this environment that we're in that they never thought of before, just because they're forced to right now. It's very simple things too. Everybody's a Zoom expert now, but
yes.
We're seeing suddenly people are discovering tools like Zoom. They're discovering that there's things like a breakout room aspect to it. And, that'll continue. I think we'll just see more and more discovery going forward.
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing a convening in Seattle a couple of weeks ago. We'd planned it for a long time with a lot of sort of learning professionals in the city. And like everyone else, we had to pivot to online. And one of the consequences of that is the constraint we had, because we had a space donated by actually Redfin, and we had a constraint. We could only get 50 people to do the kind of exercises that we wanted to do. When we figured out how to move it online, enrollment went up to 150 people. And I think there's a real hunger. Ironically, we're all socially distanced now. There's a real hunger and new appreciation for live interaction and communities coming together. I'm seeing a lot of that too.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I was going to say, I think this week was going to be your conference week. Is that right? In Scottsdale? Is this your week or last week maybe?
Last week was the conference, and I feel very fortunate that we were able to, at the beginning of March, postpone the conference until September. And I think a lot of conferences, ran into a very, very tricky situation with this crisis. They, on the one side, you've got a venue, a hotel or a conference center that has pretty ironclad contracts, and it's kind of hard to get out of, and you can't really apply things like force majeure, acts of nature and war, et cetera, to get out of the contract. And then the other side, you've got attendees, and at some conferences, vendors who are sponsoring it and other sponsors who are pulling out, and so these conference organizers, I think, we're getting hit from both sides. They're losing revenue on attendees and sponsors pulling out, and yet the venue is demanding that they stick with a contract. And so, many of these the conference organizers, I think, got caught, in this, and it unfortunately, I think, is sending some of them into bankruptcy and putting them out of business. I feel very fortunate that we were able to postpone ours till September. I hope it's long enough, but we were able to get dates in mid-September, and almost to an attendee. We had hundreds of people scheduled to attend. They have commended us on postponing it and taking very decisive action. So I feel fortunate that we were able to do that.
Are you going to experiment with sort of online conferences? I'm starting to see some of that happen now. Have you had any thoughts around that?
Well, we've been doing that for quite some time. We've always been a convener of people online, and so we've been on a daily basis right now, as I said before, bringing people together, and are just really escalating that going forward. We did have other events that we had planned throughout the spring and summer that we're putting online. So for sure, we're doing that. And I've been participating in a couple other organizations' online events as well.
Do you think this is a pause, or do you think this is kind of a reset in terms of thinking about the world of work and how organizations operate around people in the future?
I don't think it ever goes back to the way it used to be. I think it will forever be altered. I think the question is just how much. And I think that's not just true for our industry. I think that's just true for life as we know it. I think there are things that we probably took for granted that we'll think about in the future, such as public transportation, hopping in a stranger's Uber. One of my predictions is that individual car ownership will probably increase going forward. I've already talked to organizations about their open workspace environment. I talked to one CHRO yesterday of a Fortune 20 company who said, we've got a lot of people who are just right on top of each other in the office, and we're going to have to rethink that and think about how we do that differently going forward. And I know WeWork and other shared office environments are struggling with that as well. So I think that'll change in the future. But there's going to be, a lot of other, more subtle changes in the way people act and their attitudes. And I think for our industry, we have to recognize that and try to innovate and take advantage of, what this probably more remote type of lifestyle will enable us to do. And I think the learning community that's embraced online learning and distance learning in the past will come out very well in this.
We've seen almost unthinkable and certainly unprecedented engagement from the federal government. Like if you'd have told me that the current administration would be writing $1 trillion checks, I wouldn't have believed you just a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that they've addressed is benefits for gig workers. And gig work is really interesting. I mean, gig workers really don't benefit from the kind of people that you convene and look after. They don't have chief learning officers, and they don't have people looking after their welfare just by the very definition of what gig work is. It turns out that they're critical for keeping things going.
Right.
And it turns out that even the government thinks that we need to be a little bit smarter about how we protect them in terms of workers' rights and so on and so forth. Is that a topic that's come up with your community?
Oh, for sure. And we've created a talent ecosystem model for many of the companies that we work with because talent is coming from a variety of places. So gig workers is one area where it's coming from, but the smarter companies, I think, are just looking at how do they staff by capability and not worrying too much about what somebody's status is. Are you a gig worker, or are you an FTE, or something in between?